sons. The younger one said to his father, "Father, give me my share of the estate." So he divided his property between them. Not long after that, the younger son got together all he had and set off for a distant country. And squandered his wealth in wild living. After he had spent everything, there was a severe famine in the whole country, and he began to be in need. So he went and he hired himself out to a citizen of that country, who sent him to his fields to feed pigs. He longed to fill his stomach with the pods that the pigs were eating, but no one gave him food. Can you imagine being that hungry? I've seen slop, and it's nasty. When he came to his senses, he said, "How many of my father's hired men have food to spare, and here I am starving to death? I will set out and go back to my father and say to him, 'Father, I have sinned against heaven and against you. I am no longer worthy to be called your son. Make me like one of your hired men.' So he got up and he went to his father. But when he was still a long way off, his father saw him and was filled with compassion for him. He ran to his son, threw his arms around him, and kissed him. The son said to him, 'Father, I have sinned against heaven and against you. I am no longer worthy to be called your son.' But the father said to his servants, 'Quick, bring the best robe and put it on him. Put a ring on his finger and sandals on his feet. Bring the fatted calf and kill it. Let's have a feast and celebrate. For this son of mine who was dead is alive again. He was lost and is found.' And so they began to celebrate." One day, Charlie Brown was talking with his friend Linus about, now you have to catch this. This is what Charlie Brown was talking about. The pervasive sense of inadequacy he feels all the time. Charlie moaned, "You see, Linus, it goes all the way back to the beginning. The moment I was born and set foot on the stage of life, they took one look at me and he said, 'Not right for the part.'" Charlie Brown is one of those characters that embody despair. He's always, it seems, at the bottom. Linus said once to Charlie Brown, "Of all the Charlie Browns in the world, you are the Charlie Browniest." The question I have is, have you ever felt like Charlie Brown? Have you ever felt lost in life? Have you ever felt like you just didn't know which way to go, which turn to take? We've all felt that way at some time. Jesus said in John chapter 14, verse 6, he said this, "I am the way and the truth and the life. No one comes to the Father except through me." You see, in this passage, Jesus points to himself as the way to have life, how to have purpose, how to have focus, how to get the best out of what he has for us. Earlier in John's Gospel, chapter 10, verse 10, he said this, he said, "I have come that they may have life and have it to the full." Now in Luke 15, we find Jesus sharing a parable about a son and a father. The son was looking for life. He was looking to spread his wings, to get out from underneath of his father's, I don't know, maybe his control, maybe his feeling like he was stifled in some way. And he decided that he had to get it. He had to, as he thought, find life. And so he demands his inheritance, which in itself is kind of odd, but the father concedes. He divides up his wealth and he gives it to his son, and his son leaves to find life that he thought would bring life. He ended up, as it says, going into wild living. And I suspect in his wild living, he ended up blowing it all. See, people look for fulfillment in life in many different ways, many different places. In relationships, in careers, in making money, in sports, in the meaning of life. But the meaning of life is far greater than your own personal fulfillment, your own peace, even your own happiness. It's far greater than your family, your career, or even your wildest dreams and ambitions. Finding life is really finding God. The prodigal son, as he's has come to be known as, he realized that after he had blown everything, and there's an interesting point there that we sometimes overlook, there was a famine in the land. And so all the resources that he had, he blew it in wild living, but he also probably blew it in looking after himself, looking after his needs. There was a famine in the land, and then he became in need. So he went to try to find something to do, to be able to meet his needs, to be able to look after what his needs were. And, well, he ended up feeding the pigs. And in feeding the pigs, he was starving. As he was starving, he remembered, my goodness, even the servants on my father's property have way more than this. Well, I got to go back. But I'm not going to go back and demand. I'm going to go back and humble myself. You see, earthly fulfillment is empty. There's that lie, if I only had a little bit more. One of the richest men in the world, I can't remember what his name was, but he was asked that question, how much is enough? And he said, just a little bit more. One of the richest men in the world, just a little bit more. You see, earthly fulfillment is empty. In Philippians 4, verses 11 to 13, Paul said this. Now you have to catch this. This is interesting. He says, I have learned to be content. This past week I was at the elementary school, and we were doing a game. And the game was they were given a word and then given 3 choices, and they had to figure out which word was like the one that was above. And one of the words that was given was content. And none of them knew what content means. And so I had to tell them what content means without saying one of the 3 words that they had to choose from, of course. But slip of the tongue, I ended up telling them one of the words. But contentment. How many of us have found contentment? Paul says, I have learned to be content whatever the circumstance. I know what it is to be in need, and I know what it is to have plenty. I have learned the secret of being content in any and every situation, whether well-fed or hungry, whether living in plenty or in want. Now here's the key. This is the key to his contentment. Can you say that with me? Can we read this together? I can do everything through him who gives me strength. That's the key. That's the key to life. That's the key to contentment. That's the key to the whole thing. I can do everything through him. That is through God who gives me strength. Paul says it, pretty plainly, that life is not found in the things of this world or the things that they are. The prodigal son realizes this, and it says that he came to his senses. And he decides that real life is found with his Father. This parable points to the fact that real life is found in a relationship with God. It's not about keeping the rules, the do's and the don'ts. It's about the relationship that we have with God through Jesus, with his Holy Spirit living in us. Jesus said to the crowd in Luke 9, verses 23 to 25, he said this. He said, if any of you wants to be my follower, you must turn from your selfish ways, take up your cross daily, and follow me. If you try to hang on to your life, you will lose it. But if you give up your life for my sake, you will save it. And what do you benefit if you gain the whole world, but you are yourself lost or destroyed? He's saying that to find life, you must begin with God. When I graduated from high school, I thought that I really wasn't smart enough to go to university. Didn't know where I was supposed to go, so I decided to go to community college. And while I was in community college, within the first 3 to 6 months, I realized one thing. I wasn't supposed to be an instrument tech. I wasn't supposed to gain all kinds of money, because I know it's a well-paying job. Most of my friends who I took that course with, paid well. I knew that it wasn't where I was supposed to be. And so I went home and I told my dad, I said, Dad, I don't think this is what I'm supposed to do for the rest of my life. He said, you started it, boy, you're going to finish it. So I finished a 2-year program. But I knew that God had called me to be a pastor. He called me, separated me to serve him. And you know, one of the things that I have found in serving him, I have found life. I found contentment. I found fulfillment. I found purpose. I found love that is unending. And I've come to know some pretty good people through the years, and all y'all are part of that. I love y'all. And that's because I have Christ in me, who brings to me life. Jesus in Luke 9 was saying that to find life, you must begin with God. You must begin with that relationship with Jesus. Because life is all about God. In Jesus, you will save your life. In him, you will find the life that we all desire to lead. A life of fulfillment, a life of purpose, a life with direction and meaning. A life that will not be destroyed or lost. I read to you earlier from John chapter 10, verse 10, but I want to read the verses that are around that, 9 to 11, where Jesus says, I am the gate. Those who come in through me will be saved. They will come and go freely and will find good pastures. Now, he's not telling us that we're going to go out and eat grass. What are the good pastures? The good pastures are life. Finding fulfillment, finding contentment. The thief's purpose is to steal and kill and destroy. But Jesus says, my purpose is to give them a rich and satisfying life. Jesus desires to give life. Satan's desires to steal, kill, and destroy. Try to thwart that. A number of years ago, there was a movie done by Tom Hanks called The Terminal. And it was actually based, it wasn't the guy, but it was based on a fellow's life. Okay? A fellow by the name of Miran Kamari Nasri. And I found a picture of him. Go to the next slide. There he is. This guy here. For 11 years, that's where he lived. And you know where that is? That's in a Paris airport. He lived in the airport for 11 years because he had no passport. He had no citizenship. He had no papers that enabled him to leave the airport or fly to another country. He had been expelled from his country of Iran, and then he was sent away from Paris, France, because he didn't have any documentation. He said his Belgian-issued refugee document had been stolen, and so he flew to England, but he was denied entry. He was sent back to Paris, and when he returned to the Paris airport in 1988, the airport authorities allowed him to live in Terminal 1, and there he is. In Terminal 1, living all around him. You can see all this stuff in behind him in bags and stuff. Well, he stayed there for 11 years. He would write in his diary. He lived off handouts from airport employees. He cleaned up in the bathroom in the airport. And then in September of 1999, the situation reversed. The French authorities presented this man, Nasri, with an international travel card and a French residency permit. Suddenly, he was free to go anywhere he wanted. But when airport officials handed him his walking papers, to everyone's surprise, he simply smiled, tucked them into his folder, and resumed writing in his diary. They found he was afraid to leave the bench and the table that had become his home for 11 years. As the days passed and Nasri refused to leave, airport officials said that they would not throw him out of the airport, but they would have to gently and patiently coax him to find a new home. Can you imagine a more unnatural home than an airport? There's lots of stuff going on. It might be interesting, but it's not home. How many of you have gone away and then realized that you're on vacation and then you came home to rest up? You know? When we come to Christ, we have a move to make that can be as frightening as the move that Nasri had to make from leaving the airport. We are beckoned from that unnatural home of the ways of this fallen world to our new home, the ways of the kingdom of God. You see, it's all about finding life in Jesus. In Romans chapter 8, verses 9 to 11, Eugene Peterson put it this way in the message. He said, "But if God himself has taken up residence in your life, you can hardly be thinking more of yourself than of him. Anyone, of course, who has not welcomed this invisible but clearly present God, the Spirit of Christ, won't know what we're talking about. But for you who welcome him, in whom he dwells, even though you still experience all the limitations of sin, you yourself experience life on God's terms." It stands to reason, doesn't it, that if the all and present God who raised Jesus from the dead moves into your life, he'll do the same thing to you that he did in Jesus, bringing you alive to himself. When God lives and breathes in you, and he does as surely as he did in Jesus, you are delivered from that dead life with his Spirit living in you. Your body will be as alive as Christ's. Lots of people try to use God for their own selfish fulfillment. But that is not the way God made things. And it's really doomed to failure. Just like the prodigal son used his dad's wealth for wild living, then returned to the Father, you were made for God, not the other way around. God was not made for you. You were made for God. And life is about letting God use you for his plans, not your using him for your own plans. Again, in Romans 8, verse 6, Eugene Peterson in the message put it this way. He said, "Obsession with self in these matters is a dead end." Ever gone down a dead end before? Unexpectedly, I'll tell you. Had to turn around and go back. Obsession with self in these matters is a dead end. Attention to God leads us into the open, into a spacious, free life. A fellow by the name of Rick Warren, in his book, Purpose-Driven Life, he said this. He said, "You were made by God and for God. And until you understand that, life will never make sense." Just never seem to click. Again, I love how Romans 8, 12 to 14 in the Living Bible is put. He said, it's put this way. It says, "Dear brothers, you have no obligation whatever to your old sinful nature to do what it begs you to do. For if you keep on following it, you are lost and will perish." And now, perish is here, but also eternally. "But if through the power of the Holy Spirit you crush it and its evil deeds, you shall live. For all who are led by the Spirit of God are sons of God. You see, we need to continually look to the Father, to follow the Son, and receive the power we need from the Spirit. Max Lucado, in his book, It's Not About Me, he shares this story. He says, "In the early pages of my childhood memory, I see this picture. My father and I sit side by side in a chapel. We're both wearing our only suits. The shirt collar rubs my neck. The pew feels hard to my bottom. The sight of my dead uncle leaves us all silent. This is my first funeral. My 9 years of life have not prepared me for this, for death. What I see unnerves me. Aunts, typically very happy, very talkative, weeping loudly. Uncles, commonly quick with a word and a joke, they stare wide-eyed at the casket. And Buck, my big uncle, with meaty hands, big belly, and booming voice, lies whitish and waxy in the coffin. I remember my palms moistening and my heart bouncing in my chest. It felt like tennis sneakers and a clothes dryer. Fear had me in her talons. What other emotion could I feel? Where do I look? The weeping ladies, they frighten me. The glassy-eyed men, well, they puzzle me. My dead uncle, well, that just spooks me. But then I look up and I see my father. He turns his face toward me and he smiles softly and he says, "It's okay, son. It's okay." And he assures me by laying his hand on my leg. Somehow, I know it is. Why it is, I don't know. My family is still wailing. My Uncle Buck is still dead. But if Dad, in the midst of it all, says it's okay, then that's enough. At that moment, I realized something. I could look around and feel fear, or look at my father and find faith. I chose my father's face. Jesus declares to all people throughout time that he offers the only life worth living. It's the only life that has true meaning and satisfaction, that lasts not just a lifetime, but forever. He said in John chapter 10:10, "I have come that they may have life and have it to the full." People throughout time since Jesus have given their lives to Christ and have found life abundant. They have found meaning, they have found purpose, they have found life. A popular chorus of the past says something that I believe is always true. And the words go like this: if you want joy, real joy, wonderful joy, let Jesus come into your life. But there's one thing that you need to know. There's one thing that I need to make clear. And that is that Jesus doesn't offer us a life without hardship or struggle. When he says that he gives us life, he offers us his presence in the midst of struggle. And he offers to us his power to make it through the hardships. He offers to us hope that will work for the good of those who are called according to his purpose. He offers to us a life lived with him that can be done, and that life lived with him and for him, I believe, is worth it. We began this series with John 14:6, where it says, "I am the way, the truth, and the life. No one comes to the Father except through me." See, many people want to make God a loving deity, loving God, who could never bear to see anyone go to hell. These people have grabbed on his love only and have blocked out any other teaching about God's nature. See, God does love you, and he loves you dearly. In his love, he has provided a means whereby all people everywhere can be saved. Jesus is the way to God. Jesus is the truth about God. Jesus is the life with God, and no one can come to God except by him. Don't go looking for some other way, because there isn't any. Such truths demand that we come to God by accepting Jesus. It also demands that we tell all people everywhere that we want them to come to know this life as well by trusting in Jesus. And so I end with a couple of questions. One, if you haven't, will you today? Two, if you do trust in Jesus, then help us to tell others how to trust him in his way.